Welcome to the Alain Elkann interviews, an unprecedented window into the minds of some of the most well-known and respected figures of the last 25 years.
How are you?
I wake up today and discover that not only am I seeing my country, which I love, being forced out of its own European neighbourhood, but is crossing the Atlantic to make common cause with an American president who is little short of a white nationalist and racist. So you can imagine I'm not very happy. This disturbs me greatly because it's completely different from all my upbringing, whether my family or in politics, what I believe, and the identity I see for my own country.
You have been for many years an active politician. You have been minister, you have been commissioner in Europe. How do you perceive your role now in a situation like this? Can you do anything? Could you save this country from this group with other people and save this country from this avalanche, from this?
The problem is that many people in Britain think that leaving the European Union will really mean taking back control. Of course, it means the opposite. We will have less independence, less power, less influence, and instead we will simply become more isolated as a country and less able to affect international affairs and policy. That is completely alien to how Britain has seen itself all my life. But there's another dimension to this. Other people in the country think however bad this is, we have to go along with it for the sake of a democratic decision taken in 2016. That however desirable it would be to reverse it, we shouldn't for the sake of democracy. My view of that is that democracy did not end in 2016, that people have the right to think further, to think again, even to change their minds, and that now we know what leaving the European Union entails and what it means for our country. There should be another final say referendum taking place on this issue. But many in the public, many members of Parliament resist this because they think that once a decision has been taken, because we're British, we should respect it. I hope that continued deadlock in Parliament will force MPs to go back to the people. That's what I would like to see happen.
You belong to the Labour Party. Probably you're not very happy with the leader of the Labour Party at the moment, but he has said that he wants a second referendum lately. So are you going to endorse that and eventually, if this happened, to heavily campaign to make the British people understand what it means to go out instead of staying? I mean, many people say that people were misinformed or didn't understand. They just voted like this. As you said, as they know now how difficult it is and more or less what it implies, as you said, they may have changed their mind.
I respect those who disagree with my view of Europe. I respect their right to vote in favour of leaving. I disagree with them, but I understand that they have a belief in national sovereignty which they think is incompatible with membership of the European Union. But very many others who also voted that way did so for reasons that were completely unrelated to Europe, the European Union, sovereignty. They voted out of anger, protest, disillusionment about their lot, about their income, and about the direction of the country. And let's remember that in 2016, while 17.6 million people did vote to leave the European Union, 22 million people didn't vote at all. They didn't care enough, one way or the other, to vote, far exceeding the number who voted to leave. So this is a ridiculous situation where something of completely fundamental national interest to our economy, to jobs, to investment in Britain, as well as our role in the world and our influence in it, should be determined in the blink of an eye on one day in June 3 years ago, almost as it were, on the flip of a coin, with no further opportunity for people to think again. If they wish to reaffirm their original choice, let them, but do so on the basis of known facts and realities. Nobody said in 2016 that we would, for example, be leaving the European Union with a massive rupture in our economy and trade. People who advocated leave said that we would have the same trade benefits in Europe and the world, in or out of the European Union. That was a lie. I feel profound regret that we were not able to expose that as a lie at the time, but nobody was listening. They didn't want to hear from David Cameron and George Osborne and members of the government who were delivering this. It was a time of austerity. People didn't feel optimistic. It was much nearer the financial and banking crisis that had sparked a lot of anger amongst people. On television, they saw pictures of mass migration coming from Syria and elsewhere into Europe, and feared that it was going to come our way. They were told that Turkey was just about to join the European Union, and 80 million Muslims would be coming in our direction to take our jobs, and possibly our women, and our men as well. This was the fantasy. And yet these lies were peddled at the time. And you can almost not blame people for voting as they did. And what did the leader of the Labour Party do? Very little. Very little. And he's done very little since, and he offers very little leadership now. Partly because he is a weak and ineffective individual, but also because he has a sneaking sympathy for Brexit. He believes that Britain outside the European Union would be more free to build socialism in one country. He's a believer in what his supporters call Lexit, the left-wing version of Brexit. So let's be free of the European Union, its constraints, its controls, so that we can bring back economic regulation, state ownership, control of the economy, because, that's all part of his leftist outlook. Of course, he's deceiving himself. Britain won't have the freedom to do any of these things. And of course, in most respects, you can pursue national economic policies inside the European Union. So he has been pushed back and back by the Labour Party, which in its heart and in its soul is an internationalist party. It's a pro-European party. It believes that you achieve your social and economic goals as democratic socialists in cooperation with other people and other countries. So he's had very reluctantly to accept the principle of another referendum, but he's not going to throw his heart and soul into it because he doesn't believe it.
They say that if Johnson, wins this election, and now, if there are people in the party, in his party, who don't agree with him, right, in Parliament, Corbyn can have the majority and become de facto the Prime Minister. Is that possible?
If Boris Johnson pursues a no-deal Brexit, there will be a motion of no confidence tabled in the House of Commons, and Johnson may lose it. That's true. And that may lead to a general election. And the Labour Party, led by Jeremy Corbyn, may win it.
Right.
But in my view, the chances of that happening are massively expanded if Jeremy Corbyn were to take a clear, unambiguous pro-Remain position. At the moment, he has very little to say about what is the central issue facing our country, Brexit. He's been largely invisible for the last 3 years. But he's tried to fight the government tactically over Brexit, seeking some political advantage from time to time. This has not worked for him. And the reason it hasn't worked is because people in the country view Brexit as a matter of fundamental importance, not tactical opportunity, for one political party or another. It would have been much better if Jeremy Corbyn had taken a principled position which reflected the overwhelming view of his party, which is that Britain needs to remain in the European Union for its own and everyone else's good.
But you were against Corbyn as a leader.
I was against him when he was a candidate, yes.
Then when he made this big score in the election, right, you somehow changed your mind.
No, I did not change my mind. I acknowledged that he had done better campaigning in the election than anyone had expected. But remember why that was the case. Mrs. May called an election that nobody wanted. In effect, she then failed to turn up for it. She was not a viable candidate. She had a manifesto that blew up in her face, chiefly over the issue of adult social care and how it would be paid for. This was a contest between two equally unattractive candidates for Prime Minister. The result showed that Mrs. May's share of the vote increased, even though she lost seats. Jeremy Corbyn's share of the vote also increased, even though he didn't gain very many more seats. And the reason for that, Alain, is because at that time, in 2017, people who support the European Union saw him as the standard bearer of Remain. They didn't realise how weak and half-hearted he was on the subject of Brexit. This has emerged subsequently, and that's why his numbers, the Labour Party's numbers, his standing have collapsed over the last year because of his stance on Brexit.
I have two questions. First is, do you think that he, maybe you did it already, is he listening to you?
No. He listens to
Can you talk to him?
No.
Do you like to talk to him?
He has no interest in talking to people he disagrees with. He is surrounded by a small clique of people who reinforce his pro-Brexit views. They are completely out of touch with public. Many of them come from political backgrounds that has barely any relationship to the Labour Party. They are more from communist and far-left political backgrounds than from the Labour Party. So the last person he's going to talk to are people like me, because I am of the mainstream.
You think that this anti-Semitic campaign, when we read in all the papers that he is anti-Semitic, then there are people in the party, and all this is very odd because normally Jews were more in favor of the Labour Party than other party. Is this damaging his image or not?
Damaging? It certainly is. Look, I have never known anti-Semitism or anti-Jewish racism, as I prefer to call it, in the Labour Party throughout my life. I have never seen it. We've never experienced it. But what happened was, when he became leader, there was an influx of thousands of people to the Labour Party membership. Some were people who had previously been in Labour but had fallen away, people of the far left who now came back to support him. Other people were younger, new to politics, had little experience of it, and were just following fashion. And since this time, anti-Semitism has spread like a virus amongst Labour Party grassroots, as their use of social media has exposed. Now, of course it's a minority.
Yeah, but is it a liability for the party or not?
Because of course it's a liability. Well, not only have we lost the votes of Jewish people, we've lost the votes of many ordinary voters, as well as liberal opinion, people who hate racism, people who follow the Labour Party because the Labour Party is an anti-racist party. And yet we have not only these people come into membership of the Labour Party and saying the things that they do on social media, but being tolerated by the leadership with no effective action being taken against them. Other people in the Labour Party feel morally compromised remaining in a party that exhibits such
but you are out of
racism.
yourself out of the party because of that?
No, I'm in the Labour Party. But like many people, I feel dirty. I feel dirty being in a party that's prepared to tolerate people with such opinions as these. It's disgusting.
And if things go the other way, right, that people like Boris Johnson, if Boris Johnson becomes the Prime Minister and there are no parliamentary dysfunctions and he becomes officially the Prime Minister, are you very worried about that? Do you know the man, and what do you think?
Do I know Boris Johnson?
Yes.
I do know him, and I know his family. Boris Johnson is somebody who's prepared to say anything or do anything to get power. Principle, consistency are not his chief characteristics. He's perfectly capable of changing in any direction if he feels like it. He's not somebody who's rooted in a sort of deep set of principles or ideals. He is, of course, a conservative, but anyone who knows him realizes that he would be capable of expressing completely different views about Europe. Indeed, he has done in the past.
To say at the end of the day, let's stay and forget about it.
He won't be doing that, no, because he wouldn't survive if he did. You know, the Conservative Party historically has been an internationalist, pro-European party. It was more pro-European than the Labour Party was in the 60s and the 70s. Only under Mrs. Thatcher did it start tilting towards nationalism and anti-Europeanism. And that tilting has gone on and on and on until the Conservative Party has fallen over. And now there is almost no room in it for people who take a pro-European or internationalist view.
But he might be afraid of Farage, who has won so many votes on that issue, right? Who seems to be, unless they impeach him with other matters, the business stories, he seems to be the only politician who is really strong.
Farage is attacking the Conservative Party from the right. Farage wants to take over the Conservative Party. He wants to be a Conservative Member of Parliament. He'd love to be in a Conservative government, and indeed has said privately that under Boris Johnson he hopes to come back into the Conservative Party. He admires Boris Johnson. He thinks he's going to be, a good, strong, pro-Brexit leader. And so he wants to end his separation from the Conservative Party. I don't think it will be so easy.
He wants to merge, you mean, and maybe become a minister.
I think he would like in the future to be a Conservative MP. As long as the Conservative Party maintains its present character, which is essentially a nationalist party. And what you're seeing is more and more Conservative MPs who are of a more traditional kind of internationalist, one nation, centrist kind. They're just leaving. They're giving up. Just as many people in the Labour Party.
Where do they go? Nowhere. And is it possible to create a new party?
Well, an attempt has already been made once this year to create a new party, and it was a failure.
But the conditions are strong now.
The conditions, I believe, will become stronger if Boris Johnson takes over, because many Conservatives will feel that they don't belong in that sort of Conservative party. Equally, there are many Labour people who feel they no longer belong to a Labour Party, whose character has been changed by Jeremy Corbyn. But feeling that way is quite a long way from creating the opportunity and taking the steps to form a new party. That's a very big step indeed, because in the British electoral system, in which you vote first past the post for the party of your choice, you do not have that proportional representation. You don't have that ability for smaller parties to gain votes and to be represented in Parliament in the way that you do in most continental countries. So our electoral system presents a very high bar for new parties.
So in case there would be a new party of some consensus, would you join it, or?
No, my intention is to stay, fight and save the Labour Party, and that is what I devote some energy to every single day.
Now, you, at the beginning of this interview or conversation, you named also the danger of this alliance with the White House, with Donald Trump's, who, I don't know, we don't have a crystal ball, but it looks like he could be re-elected president. We never know, but if he's re-elected, we have another 4.5 years to go with Trump. And if Boris Johnson is elected, they seem to be willing to be very good friends, right? So if this happens, which is not so improbable, what will happen? If Boris Johnson is Prime Minister, right, and does his Brexit, and the other side we have Donald Trump.
If that happens, Boris Johnson will lose support in his party and a lot of friends outside it. What Donald Trump represents and believes is anathema to mainstream British opinion. And the idea that as a result of Brexit, we have to kowtow to an American president who holds those views will outrage people in Britain. Even those who have a sneaking admiration for Donald Trump because of the strength of his personality nonetheless regard him as reckless and a danger to the world. Also, the way in which he has conducted himself in relation to the British government, our Prime Minister, whom he has insulted, and the way in which he treated Her Majesty's ambassador in Washington has been shocking to British people. And in my view, re-elected or not, he will never be viewed by people in Britain as a true embodiment of or spokesman for our values and our interests.
Yeah, because what he has in mind is to make of England a new American state, right, with a little governor who is the Prime Minister.
He treats us already as if we're a new state. And if Boris Johnson conducts himself like some mini Trump, he will lose a lot of support in Britain.
Now, in this Brexit affair, the Irish problem, right? It seems to be the technical problem. Do you think this technical problem can be solved?
Well, I'm a former Northern Ireland Secretary. I implemented the Good Friday Agreement between 1999 and 2001, my responsibility was actually to implement the Good Friday Agreement. I set up the new institutions, the shared power, devolved government in Northern Ireland, and I implemented the removal of that hard border between North and South in Ireland. I know what's at stake. I know what is riding on it. If we were to see a return of that border, representing as it does the age-old conflict between unionists and nationalists in Ireland, we would be playing with danger, great danger, because there are forces, extremists, who would be coming back and using this as a fresh opportunity to contest the peace agreement and to plunge Irish politics back into a sectarian.
So that wouldn't be a great argument, if not an excuse, to say Brexit is impossible. Because
UK,
other things can be,
but both the UK,
discussed. But
both the UK and the European Union have stated as a principle that there should be no return of that hard border between North and South in Ireland. The question is how you avoid it. And I believe over time this can be managed in a way that is acceptable, but if not, then I believe we are right to uphold that insurance policy, that backstop in the treaty between the EU and the UK, which says that in no circumstances should a hard border be allowed to return. I think it's manageable, but the principle of avoiding it is very important to uphold. Otherwise, we are taking a major risk with continued peace and stability in Ireland.
so after this gloomy picture, right, of the British situation, and
In the meantime, the European Union is forging ahead. I mean, the European Union is not falling apart. The European Union isn't holding back. The European Union is putting in place a new top leadership, which seems to me balanced, well qualified, with a sense of purpose. I think they've chosen a good new president of the European Commission. I think the other top jobs have gone to good people. In contrast to my feelings about my own country, I'm rather optimistic about the European Union now, because I think that after many years of introspection, they are now staking out key areas of progress for the European Union, which will strengthen it in the long term. I'm talking about the way in which it's embracing the technological revolution which is underway and what that means for European industry and transformation of the European economy. I'm thinking about the commitment to strengthening Europe's external border and its management of migration. I'm thinking about the focus on defence and security arrangements externally that Europe needs to invest in further. I'm thinking about its commitment to the battle on climate change, which is taken very seriously, but also the maintenance of Europe's social contract, the way in which we manage so many adjustments, both to globalization, but also to the impact of automation, artificial intelligence, which is going to touch every single part of our society.
But aren't you afraid of this, or at least very concerned by this populistic wave that is taking place in Italy, in Austria, in Poland, in Hungary, in Greece, maybe? The fact that there is...
It's there, but it's not growing. The European election showed that there's a strong presence of nationalists and populists, but their support is not growing. That's the key reading from the European elections. I don't minimise it, I don't dismiss its importance, but this is an expression of popular discontent about the direction of Europe, the coherence of its policies, and the strength of its political leadership. Those criticisms in many ways are valid. People are, that we are seeing a backlash against the centrist parties of the left and right, because frankly they haven't performed and delivered as well as they should have done over the last decade. So people are turning to alternatives, in some cases extremists of the left or right. But I don't believe that represents a permanent structural change in European politics. I think it's something that we have to recognise, respond to, and counter by constructing better parties, better policies, better political leadership on the centre ground of European politics, both on the centre-left and the centre-right, where in both cases we've seen a lot of underperformance and failure.
Don't you see a great attraction? I mean, you said before that Trump may be re-elected and so on. Aren't there a lot of little Trumps in Europe? I mean, from Salvini to Farage, from Marine Le Pen to... I mean, the model of anti-democratic model.
But why? The question is not what exists, but why it's happened. And how do we respond to it? We're capable of doing it, but we're not doing it adequately. And in my view, we need far more than tweaks of the policy dial. We are facing massive changes and challenges in Europe. That requires an equally strong response in policy terms. As I said, if we are going to own the future in Europe, then we have to come to terms with the impact of the technological revolution, which is going to touch every part of our lives. It contains both opportunities and risks. We have to do far more to exploit and capitalise on the opportunities, and equally do far more to reduce and manage the risks for people, for communities, for whole regions across Europe. And my complaint is not that people are voting for nationalist and populist parties, although I regret that they are. My complaint is about the centrist parties who are not responding adequately to this political...
Yeah, but this brings to disaster, right? Because at the end of the day, people will be fed up. That's what they showed in Italy.
It carries the risk of disaster if the mainstream parties don't re-equip themselves with the organisation, the policies, the ideas, and the quality of leadership that's required in this situation. My view is that we have to renew the centre ground of politics in Europe. We have to reinvent ourselves, reinvent our ideas, our policies, our organisation, the way in which we conduct ourselves. We need a cultural revolution blowing through the centre ground political parties. Now, you've just seen in Greece the centre-right taking back power from the far left. It happens. You saw Macron winning in France. You've seen the AfD party in Germany being contained. You're seeing growing support for the centre, left and right in the Netherlands and in Northern Europe. So, good can come out of this situation, but the victory of ideals has to be organised. And throughout my political life, I've been an organiser of ideas, an organiser of campaigns, an organiser of political parties. When we created New Labour, I still am fired up by the desire.
Would like to organise New Europe.
I would love to be playing my part in organising a new Europe, and it's a calamity that people like me and many others who have so much to contribute to this new Europe are being marginalised as a result both of the Brexit decision that was taken but also by the failure of my own party, the Labour Party, to rise to this challenge, but also the drift of the Conservative Party to the nationalist right. We have got 10 years in this country ahead of us to pick ourselves up and out of the chaos that we have descended into. And I'm afraid it is likely to take a decade before we are able to re-emerge. And in the meantime, Britain, I'm afraid, is going to become a smaller country, both economically and politically. We're going to become a less influential country. We're going to become a more introspective country during the coming 10 years. But beyond that, I hope that Phoenix-like, we will be able to re-emerge different and stronger from what I know is going to be a bad and punishing experience for our country.
Alain Elkann interviews.